I learned the hard way that in executive rooms my silence was logged as weakness, not discipline. My name is Claire Thompson, and this was the morning they decided I was disposable. The courthouse ventilation hissed above the recessed lights like static no one could quite tune out, and the glass partitions threw back softened reflections of everyone who mattered enough to be seen from more than one angle. I stood at counsel table before the hearing opened, fingertips resting on a legal pad I had ruled myself at dawn. Blue margin on the left, issue codes on the right, dates in the centre column where memory could not distort them. The mahogany rail had been polished to a mirror sheen. Brass nameplates carried surnames and firms in black serif lettering. Ranked seating did the rest. Senior partners in front, junior associates behind them, contract staff along the wall where you could hear but not shape the room. I had occupied every layer of that architecture over the last year. That morning they placed me at the edge again, where visibility became optional. No one said good morning to me first. They nodded at Martin Keane. He arrived with the loose confidence of a man who had never been made to carry his own paper. Navy suit, silver watch, cufflinks that reflected the overhead light each time he adjusted his sleeve. 2 litigators flanked him, and a younger attorney carried 3 trial binders with colour tabs arranged for performance more than use. Martin did not look at me when he sat down, which was its own statement because he had always preferred to erase me before he contradicted me. The court reporter rolled in her machine, tested a line under her breath, and clipped an extra stack of paper to the side tray. Her face stayed neutral in the professional way I had learned to admire. Neutrality could be a shield. It could also be a witness stand with no oath required. "Call the matter," the courtroom deputy said, and the room settled into the ritual cadence that made cruelty sound like administration. Counsel announced appearances. For Plaintiff Keane Systems. For defendant and counter-claimant, Claire Thompson. My own name sounded thinner through institutional microphones, flattened by the acoustics. Martin leaned back before anyone finished the procedural preliminaries. He folded one ankle across the opposite knee and smiled toward the opposite table, then toward the gallery, where 2 in-house compliance people sat as if they had wandered into the wrong room and were too polite to leave. He wore confidence the way some men wore rank, as if it had been issued to him permanently. When the judge asked whether the parties had narrowed the disputed issues for preliminary scheduling, Martin's lead counsel gave the expected speech about cooperation and efficiency, and then Martin asked to address the court directly. His lawyer hesitated for half a second and then nodded, because even experienced counsel could confuse client management with deference when the client signed the checks. "Ms. Thompson has theories, not proof," Martin said, each word clipped cleanly. "We are ready to litigate facts." He turned slightly toward the court reporter without waiting for permission. "Would you read that line back, please?" The reporter's fingers hovered, then moved. Quote, "Ms. Thompson has theories, not proof. We are ready to litigate facts." End quote. A few chairs shifted. One junior associate on my side looked down at his laptop so quickly he nearly missed the key. Another pretended to organize exhibits he had already alphabetized. Nobody met my eyes. It was not dramatic. That was the point. In rooms like that, injury came wrapped in procedure, and if you reacted too visibly, the injury became your temperament. I did not object. I did not ask for admonishment. I did not look at Martin. I straightened the top edge of my legal pad so it aligned with the table seam, uncapped my pen, and drew one blue line beneath the phrase, "Theories, not proof." Then I stood when recognized and said, "Your Honor, defendant requests entry of discovery deadlines contemporaneous with today's scheduling order, including preservation parameters for electronically stored information and metadata retention." My voice sounded calm enough that one of Martin's associates gave a faint, sympathetic look, as if I had finally accepted what everyone else already knew. Surrender had a posture in legal rooms, shoulders low, tone even, no visible anger. I had learned to borrow that posture because it lowered the room's guard. The judge glanced down. "Counsel, we are at an initial stage. Why broaden now?" "Because the timeline is central," I said. "And because delay creates asymmetry, I am asking for process, not findings." Martin's counsel stepped in. "Your Honor, that is premature and burdensome. Plaintiff denies any wrongdoing and does not intend to engage in wide-net electronic phishing." Phishing. The word landed where all those words landed. On me. Not strategic. Emotional. Unfocused. Female caution, he used to call it, when I flagged duplicate billing pathways and inconsistent procurement tags in meetings where men in expensive suits nodded at him and thanked me for my diligence after he had reframed my work as anxiety management. I kept my gaze on the bench. Narrow protocol is acceptable. I request dates and custodians now. The judge exhaled, half patience, half fatigue. I'll set standard deadlines. Any special protocol requires a motion supported by specific need. Understood, I said. Martin's smile returned, small and private this time, as if he had just confirmed a prediction to himself. He touched his water glass but did not drink. His counsel began discussing proposed dates with mine, and the hearing moved on in the neutral bureaucratic stream that lets everyone pretend the opening wound was incidental. It had not been incidental. It had been the point. Public diminishment first, record second, negotiation third. Martin had refined that sequence over years in boardrooms where I drafted the compliance architecture, and he delivered the summary as though it had arrived from nowhere. While counsel debated whether 30 days or 45 was more realistic for initial document exchange, my mind tracked older rooms layered beneath this one. 6 years earlier, during my second quarter at Keen Systems, I had presented a risk memorandum on contract change approvals. Martin skimmed the cover page and said, in front of 12 people, "Claire sees risk in weather reports." Laughter, contained and polite. I had stood still and taken notes while he used my framework 2 weeks later with his signature block on the board packet. 3 years later, at a renewal dinner, everyone from legal and procurement sat at the long table except me. My name had been accidentally omitted from the reservation, and Martin sent a text that said, "We already covered your section. Good work." 2 years later, when I flagged unexplained billing increments tied to amended deliverables, he called me into his office, shut the door, and asked whether this is about your termination or about facts. He said facts as if it were a credential he owned. Back in the hearing room, somebody passed a note to somebody else. A partner murmured about calendar congestion. The court reporter replaced a cartridge and resumed without expression. The fluorescent light over the witness stand flickered once and held steady. I wrote 3 words in my margin: preserve deletion intervals. When the scheduling colloquy ended, the judge set dates in a tone that made clear she expected adults to behave like officers of the court and not like adversaries in a reputation contest. I had seen that tone fail before. I had also seen it hold when record evidence removed personality from the equation. That distinction had become my private discipline. Never ask the room to believe me. Ask the room to verify what happened without me. As parties gathered their binders, Martin finally looked at me directly. He did it with the mild civility he used at industry conferences when introducing me to people who outranked him in title, but not influence. "Ms. Thompson," he said, audible enough for nearby counsel, "I trust we can keep this efficient." "Efficiency follows preservation," I said. He gave a thin smile. "If there were anything to preserve, you would have produced it already." I capped my pen. That is not how discovery works. His counsel touched his sleeve, a subtle pull toward the aisle. Martin allowed himself to be guided away, still composed, still convinced the room had registered what he needed it to register. He was the principal, and I was the former contractor with grievances and no file drawer full of certainty. Around us, chairs scraped, printer's word, and the deputy called the next matter. The routine moved on with no pause for what had just happened. I stayed at the table until the gallery emptied, then stacked my papers in chronological order and slid the blue ink page on top. The line he had asked the reporter to read back remained clean and centered, now part of the transcript he believed would contain me. Through the glass wall, I could see attorneys drifting toward elevators in clustered hierarchies, partners in front, associates behind, everyone rehearsing what they would say to clients before lunch. I had spent enough years in those corridors to know how quickly narratives calcified. She overreached. She took it personally. She had concerns, but no proof. Silence wasn't peace. It was surrender disguised as professionalism, and I had paid that price for too long in rooms built to reward the loudest certainty. I gathered my legal pad, turned toward the clerk's station to confirm service logistics, and asked for a certified copy request form before noon filing cutoffs. My hand did not shake when I signed it. My voice did not rise. By the time I stepped back into the corridor, the hiss of the ventilation followed me like a metronome, and for the first time in years, my restraint was no longer a hiding place. It was a strategy with a docket number. The corridor outside courtroom 5B narrowed into a bright spine of glass and stone, with framed donor plaques on one side and a line of waiting litigants on the other, each person holding a folder as if paper could stabilize a pulse. I moved toward the clerk's intake window with my certified copy request form clipped to the front of my pad, and I could feel eyes settle and slide away, the practiced etiquette of professionals who did not want to be seen witnessing the wrong thing. Martin's team stopped near the elevators first, then drifted back toward intake when one of his associates realized they needed a stamped scheduling order before noon. That small overlap of logistics created the next theatre. In federal buildings, humiliation rarely announced itself. It emerged at counters, in queues, in places where hierarchy met routine and routine became display. The intake window sat beneath a digital clock that read 11:17 a.m., red numerals ticking through the same second for everyone. A deputy clerk in wire-rimmed glasses reached for my form, scanned it, and asked for the case caption. I answered, and while she typed, Martin's lead counsel stepped into the lane beside me, close enough that our sleeves nearly touched, though there was no reason for him to stand that close. He passed his own documents through the side slot and said, not to me but with the volume calibrated for the line behind us, "Please ensure all transcript requests are complete. We're seeing a lot of speculative filings in this matter." He let the word speculative rest on the tile and then added, "Client resources should not be burned on narratives." Two junior associates behind him gave small professional smiles, the kind that signaled allegiance without overt participation. One of them had spent an hour with me the week before reviewing billing chronology and had nodded when I showed him 3 duplicate authorization paths. Now he looked at the wall schedule as if he had never recognized a discrepancy in his life. The deputy clerk paused. Not long, just long enough to register the tension, and then resumed typing with the same neutral cadence. Neutrality again. Shield and witness, both. I turned my request so the case number faced her directly. "Please include expedited certification," I said. "I will pay the statutory rate at filing." Martin had followed his counsel to the counter and now stood half a pace back, hands in his pockets, expression relaxed. "Ms. Thompson," he said, "you're not preserving rights, you're preserving a storyline." The line behind us tightened. Someone coughed into a sleeve. A process server shifted his messenger bag from one shoulder to the other and stared hard at the floor tiles. I kept my gaze on the deputy clerk. "I'm preserving the record." Martin gave a short laugh that did not rise above formal civility. "The record is not a diary." The deputy clerk slid my receipt through the slot. "Certified request accepted. Pickup window closes at 4:30. "Thank you," I said. Martin's counsel received his stamped order, then angled his body toward me with a courtroom smile still in place. "Counsel, if you intend to file extraordinary discovery motions, professional courtesy would suggest advanced draft exchange. We prefer not to spend billable time correcting emotional pleadings." The phrase landed with surgical precision. Emotional pleadings. Not weak argument, not incorrect citation, but emotional. Gendered without saying gender, discrediting without profanity, clean enough for marble halls. I could feel the first heat of anger move across my chest and up my neck, a familiar acceleration I had trained for in boardrooms where a raised voice could erase a year of technical work. For 1 second, I imagined turning toward him and reciting every date he had omitted, every deletion interval I had flagged, every invoice sequence his client had routed through renamed cost centers. I imagined saying his junior had confirmed the pattern in private and gone mute in public. I imagined the brief, satisfying disorder of making them flinch. Instead, I stacked my receipt on top of my pad and squared the corners against the brass edge of the counter. "You'll have every filing through proper channels," I said. "Service will be timely." He held my eyes for a beat too long, testing whether he could draw me into one unscripted sentence he could quote later. When I gave him none, he shrugged in visible relief, as if composure proved his thesis. Martin touched his counsel's elbow and they moved toward the elevators, where the mirrored doors reflected them as a tight, confident unit, 3 dark suits in coordinated retreat. The doors closed. Their reflections vanished. The corridor noise resumed its ordinary hum. I stayed at the window long enough to request the digital audio backup procedure. The deputy clerk looked up over her glasses, measuring whether I understood what I was asking. "Those requests require motion," she said, not Clark approval. I understand. I'm confirming protocol, not seeking release today. She nodded once, this time with a trace of respect. Then, cite Local Rule 30 Appendix and specify the segment. Noted. When I stepped away, one of the younger attorneys from my side, Daniel Reeve, second chair by title, senior by pedigree, caught up with me near the security re-entry arch. He kept his voice low, as if discretion could soften the content. Claire, a word. We moved to the alcove beside a vending machine that smelled faintly of burnt coffee and disinfectant. Through the glass wall we could see the city washed in a pale midday glare. Daniel loosened his tire fraction and exhaled. You need to de-intensify this. I requested deadlines and transcript certification. You requested metadata preservation in an initial hearing. Opposing counsel will frame that as a fishing expedition, and frankly, they already are. We should focus on settlement posture before this becomes reputationally expensive. For whom? He gave me a patient look I had seen on men explaining process to women who had built the process. For all stakeholders, including you. I felt the second wave of anger, colder than the first. Not because he disagreed, but because he had sat through the same hearing and absorbed the same insult and decided the strategic risk was my tone, not Martin's performance. Around us, people passed through the metal detector. Belts in trays, phones reclaimed, badges clipped back to lapels. Institutions swallowing conflict in measured bites. Daniel continued, if there were true fraud signals, prior counsel would have found them. Prior counsel represented Martin. He spread his hands. Exactly. They had visibility. They had incentives. Claire. He paused, choosing words that could sound collegial on a transcript. You are close to this. That proximity can blur judgment. There it was. The polished version of the old line. Not incompetent, not irrational, merely too affected to be reliable. I watched his reflection in the vending machine glass, the way he squared himself for reasonableness. For one dangerous second, I wanted to tell him that proximity had never blurred my work. It had sharpened it until I could identify a manipulated timestamp by the spacing of colons. I wanted to tell him I knew exactly how many times Martin had used the phrase operational adjustment to disguise unauthorized scope changes. 9 in writing, 17 in meetings, always followed by a billing amendment. I wanted to tell him that discipline was not passivity and my silence had been tactical long before he learned my name. I placed my legal pad against the wall and wrote 3 lines while he watched. Move for targeted imaging, limit custodians, attach discrepancy log index. Blue ink, block print, no tremor. Then I looked up. Your caution is noted. He blinked, unprepared for the formal phrasing. That's not what I meant. It is close enough. Are you refusing team guidance? I'm declining strategic dilution. His jaw tightened. You understand this can affect staffing decisions. I understand record decisions affect outcomes. Staffing can follow wherever it chooses. He stared at me for a beat, then nodded in the clipped way attorneys do when they realize persuasion has failed, but optics still matter. Send me any draft before filing. Service list will receive what the docket receives. He left without another word, crossing back into the main corridor where his pace immediately matched 2 partners from our side. They did not look back. The hierarchy resealed itself around them as naturally as water. I remained in the alcove, the vending machine motor vibrating softly at knee height, and let my breathing slow to the count I used before depositions. 4 in, hold, 6 out. Restraint was not softness. Restraint was sequence. First secure the transcript, then secure the preservation framework, then force the narrowest order they could not honestly oppose. In rooms addicted to confidence theatre, the only durable interruption was verifiable detail entered on time. By noon, I was at the litigation support office on the 3rd floor, a windowless suite with low fluorescent panels and rows of labelled media lockers behind a badge-locked door. The technician on duty, Miss Alvarez, checked my identification and handed me the forensic imaging request packet without commentary. I completed the sections in print, proposed custodians, date ranges, system sources, privilege protocol, hash verification method. No adjectives, no accusations, no mention of intent. Process language only. When she reviewed the form, her brows lifted slightly at the precision. You've done this before, she said. Enough times to avoid broad asks. She tapped the custodian list. 3 names only? For now. Most parties overreach. Most parties want a headline. I want admissibility. That earned a small nod. She stamped received and slid me a reference number card. If the court grants imaging, use this number in all communications. Chain of custody logs, auto link. Thank you. I left the office with the card tucked behind my bar number in my wallet and walked back toward the filing room, where the air was cooler and carried the metallic smell of toner. At the self-service terminal, I drafted the shell of the motion. Narrowly tailored forensic preservation, specific custodians, identified systems, limited date bands tied to contract amendments. I cited rule text, local appendices, and 2 sanctions cases from the same district where delayed preservation had prejudiced timeline reconstruction. I did not include Martin's corridor comments. I did not include Daniel's warning. The record did not need my indignation, it needed structure. At 12:43 p.m, I sent the draft to the service list exactly as promised, then filed it 6 minutes later when no one objected to format. The confirmation screen flashed accepted, docketed, timestamp preserved. Across the room, 2 associates from another matter argued over exhibit stickers in whispers sharp as paper cuts. A clerk wheeled a cart of bound transcripts past me, the stacked volumes tied with red bands. Institutional life continuing, indifferent and precise. My phone vibrated once with Daniel's response. Received. No further comment. A second vibration followed from an unknown number with no message, just a missed call and no voicemail. I entered the number in my notes and marked it for later verification, then returned my attention to the docket entry now visible on the public terminal. Motion filed. Hearing requested. Relief narrowly specified. No rhetoric, no spectacle. In the hearing room an hour earlier they had tried to define me as theory. In the corridor they had tried to define me as emotion. I chose the only definition that survived contact with a judge: sequence, citation, and timing. I printed the filed motion, folded it once, and placed it beneath the blue-lined page in my legal pad. 2 sheets that did not look like much in my hands, but carried the only leverage that ever held in a room like this. Silence, when directed, was no longer surrender. It was calibration. My phone vibrated again before I could slide the printed motion into my briefcase, the same unlisted number rising on the screen like a second knock from someone too careful to leave fingerprints. I let it ring once more, then answered in the low register I used when every word might be replayed later. Claire Thompson. A woman's voice came through, textured with age and restraint, not fragile, not hurried. You still map deletion intervals, Ms. Thompson? I looked at the fluorescent reflection on the terminal glass and kept my tone neutral. Who is this? Someone who watched you take notes while everyone else watched him perform. A pause. Records annex, mezzanine level, 20 minutes. Come alone if you want anything usable. The line went dead. I stood motionless for 3 breaths, phone still against my ear, listening to the empty channel. Then I opened my notes app and logged the call time, duration, and exact phrasing while it was fresh, because memory was valuable, but contemporaneous notes were admissible. Across the filing room, the clerk with the transcript cart disappeared through a restricted door and the quiet returned to mechanical sounds. Printer rollers, HVAC hiss, the muted thud of stamp pads meeting paper. I wrote one more line beneath the call log, potential source tied to prior observation at hearing. By the time I reached the elevator bank, Daniel had sent a second message. Do not engage with non-party contacts without team review. Forward any outreach to me first. It was not a request. It was hierarchy disguised as protocol, the same structure that had kept my work visible only when it carried someone else's signature. I typed back, acknowledged. Then I put the phone away and did not forward the number. The mirrored elevator doors opened and gave me my own face from 3 angles. The courthouse version of me with a neutral mouth and shoulders square enough to look unprovoked. That image had been built over years and not in one office. 6 years at Keen Systems had taught me the choreography of being consulted in private and contradicted in public. I had arrived as an external compliance architect with a record clean enough that they called me disciplined before they called me difficult. In my first quarter, Martin invited me to a governance review in the 18th floor boardroom, all glass walls and a view of the river that made everyone at the table sit straighter than usual. I presented a risk matrix for change order approvals, colour-coded by control failure severity, and when I finished, Martin smiled at the directors and said, Claire is exemplary at caution. We need operators too. Laughter followed, neat and social. Nobody said the matrix was wrong, they only positioned it as temperament. 2 weeks later, he used my matrix in a board packet under his name, with my language tightened into his cadence. I found out because an analyst accidentally sent me the deck while requesting your latest revision. I replied with track changes to the mislabeled version. Martin called me 5 minutes later. Do not make attribution an issue in front of directors, he said. We need one voice at that level. Accuracy is one voice, I told him. He had exhaled, then switched to the tone men use when explaining weather patterns. You are valuable when you are practical. The elevator stopped on 2, then 3, then mezzanine. Nobody entered. As the doors opened, I remembered another room, another exclusion rendered as logistics. Renewal dinner, Riverstone Hotel, 3 years into my contract. I had drafted the compliance section of the client retention strategy, then arrived to find no place card for me at the long table, only polished silver and folded menus where legal and procurement sat shoulder to shoulder. The maître d' checked twice, apologised once, and offered to find room near the service station. Martin texted from inside the dining room. We already covered your section. Good work. That was the entire message. I spent that meal in the lobby, annotating a red-lined indemnity clause while the elevator doors opened and closed on people who knew exactly where they belonged. A week after that dinner, an internal strategy email circulated to 21 recipients with the subject line, Final Negotiation Framework. My analysis was embedded in Section 4. My name was nowhere on the thread. When I asked legal operations for the full chain, they told me there had been a distribution list update. Administrative oversight. In companies where reputations are manufactured from visibility, oversight is rarely accidental. The mezzanine corridor to records annex was narrower than the public floors, lit by cooler bulbs that left no warm corners. At the end of the hall, a brushed steel plaque read, Archival Services and Litigation Storage. The door beside it required badge access. The waiting area did not. 3 moulded chairs lined one wall. A water dispenser hummed softly in the corner. I took the seat with sightline to both hall approaches and set my legal pad on my lap without opening it. While I waited, my mind moved to the termination meeting that had turned disagreement into litigation. Martin had asked me into his office late on a Thursday, blinds half closed against a storm that never arrived. His general counsel sat beside him with a folder already open to the separation page. Martin did not mention performance. He mentioned alignment. We need less friction in risk channels, he said. Your posture has become adversarial. My posture has been documented, I replied. His counsel slid the folder toward me. Sign tonight, and we can avoid unnecessary escalation. I read the non-disparagement language and the waiver clause that tried to extinguish claims attached to unpaid invoices and retaliatory termination. This release is overbroad. Martin folded his hands. Then perhaps this is about emotion, not contract. The phrase had followed me into every room afterward, translated into cleaner variants by people who never had to endure it directly. In deposition prep, one partner asked, could your interpretation be influenced by personal grievance? In a chambers conference, opposing counsel said, Ms. Thompson appears invested in narrative coherence over commercial reality. At an internal strategy call last month, a colleague from my own side muted himself late and did not realise I could still hear him say, she's smart, but she's making this autobiographical. The line stayed with me because it was lazy and because it worked. Doubt, once labelled as temperament, could be circulated faster than any evidentiary chart. Footsteps sounded in the corridor, slow and even. An older woman rounded the corner wearing a charcoal coat and low heels built for long days on hard floors. Silver hair pinned at the nape, leather portfolio under one arm, courthouse visitor badge clipped precisely to her lapel. She looked at me directly and said my name without inflection. Ms. Thompson. Yes. She sat in the chair beside mine rather than across from me, as if proximity signalled collaboration and not confrontation. I'm Eleanor Voss. I was senior paralegal at Haldane Pike when Keen Systems was their anchor client. I knew the firm. Martin had used them before changing litigation shops after his first preservation dispute. I kept my hands still on the pad. Why contact me? Because your motion this morning requested exactly what should have been requested 9 months ago. She opened her portfolio and removed a slim envelope and a transparent evidence pouch with a red tamper strip. And because I retired before I could be instructed to forget what I had logged. The envelope was cream stock, no markings. The pouch contained a matte black encrypted drive with a white label, K of V 17/archive extract/read-only image. Beneath the label, a second sticker showed a hash value in small print and initials in blue ink that did not match Eleanor's name. She held the pouch between two fingers, not handing it over yet. Chain of custody is clean, and he assumed no one would map the deletion intervals. The words settled between us with the force of something prepared, repeated, and finally delivered. I met her eyes. What exactly is on it? Mail store export from 3 custodians over a constrained date range. Procurement, billing operations, executive office relay. She tapped the envelope. And discrepancy log pages that should have gone with the first production but were withheld from the index. Why not give this to enforcement directly? I did what I could through internal channels routed upward. Her expression did not change. I am not here for theatre. I am here because if this enters without authentication and sequence, it will be buried as contamination. I nodded once. Then we do this correctly. I took out my phone, opened a fresh note, and began dictating in real time so she could hear the record as I built it. Meeting initiated at Records Annex Mezzanine, 13:19 hours. Present, Claire Thompson and Eleanor Voss, former senior paralegal, Haldane Pike. Source offers 1 sealed evidence pouch labelled COVA 17 and 1 envelope containing discrepancy logs. Source states chain of custody clean, references deletion interval mapping. I turned the screen toward her. Confirm or correct? Accurate, she said. Add that I did not access contents after export verification. I added the line. Done. Only then did she pass me the pouch and envelope. The plastic was cool and rigid in my hands, the tamper strip unbroken, adhesive edges still flat. Symbolic objects are often talked about as if they carry magic. This one carried procedure. Label, hash, initials, seal. Not vindication yet. Permission to test. Who are the initials? I asked, pointing to the sticker. Litigation support technician at my former firm. Martin's outside counsel requested storage optimization 48 hours later. She let the phrase hang. The mailbox segment associated with these dates no longer appeared in subsequent exports. I wrote it down exactly. From the corridor entrance, a security officer glanced toward us, saw 2 women with paperwork, and kept walking. Institutional invisibility working in my favour for once. I pulled a business card from my wallet and wrote Miss Alvarez's reference number on the back. I am taking this directly to litigation support intake for logged storage pending motion outcome. You are willing to provide a declaration? Eleanor closed her portfolio. Yes, but narrowly. Foundation facts, process facts, no speculation on intent. Agreed. She stood, then paused. He relied on audience management. Most of them did not read what they filed. They read him. Her gaze moved to the evidence pouch in my hands. This forces reading. She left the way she had come, measured and unhurried, and did not look back. I remained seated for a moment, listening to the water dispenser hum and the faint pulse of ventilation behind the ceiling tiles. The pouch rested on my legal pad like a small, sealed engine. For years, Martin had controlled rooms by deciding what counted as credible before facts could be tested. This did not reverse that by itself. It altered the sequence. I stood and walked straight to the litigation support office on 3, badge in one hand, evidence pouch visible in the other, so no one could later suggest concealment. Miss Alvarez looked up as I entered and immediately reached for an intake bin, lined with anti-static foam. New submission? She asked. Potential third-party source material, sealed on receipt. I need full chain of custody logging, witness signature line, and restricted access flag pending court order. Her eyes went to the tamper strip, then to my face. You're moving quickly. Speed is not the goal. Continuity is. She slid a form onto the counter. State source. I wrote Eleanor Voss's name, former role, contact number, and the exact language she had used regarding chain integrity. I attached my contemporaneous note, signed and time-stamped, then placed the pouch in the bin without breaking the seal. Ms. Alvarez printed barcoded tags, scanned each one twice, and affixed one to the bin, one to the form, one to a receipt copy for me. "Locker assignment C14, she said. "No access without judicial authorization or stipulated protocol. Include the envelope as companion physical exhibit," I said, placing the discrepancy logs beside the bin. "Separate sleeve, linked record." She nodded and completed the second log. When she handed me the receipt, the paper was warm from the printer. Evidence item KV17 and discrepancy log entered, time-stamped, secured. A symbol transformed into a record entry. In this building, that was how truth acquired weight. I folded the receipt once and placed it behind the blue-lined page in my legal pad, directly above the motion I had filed an hour earlier. Then I stepped back into the corridor where the same ventilation hiss travelled above the lights, and for the first time that day, the sound no longer resembled static. It sounded like pressure holding. I stepped into the main corridor with the intake receipt still warm in my hand, and my phone lit up with 3 notifications in quick succession: a docket alert, a calendar hold, and an internal message flagged urgent by our own side. The docket alert came first. Keen Systems had filed an emergency motion for protective order and evidentiary quarantine, alleging potential misappropriation of privileged materials by a terminated contractor acting outside formal discovery channels. My calendar populated a meet and confer in Conference Suite 3F 15 minutes later. Daniel's message followed with no greeting. "Do not reference source identity orally. Let lead counsel speak." The courthouse air carried that metallic toner smell that settled in the back of the throat, and the pressure I had felt in litigation support hardened into something narrower and more useful. Martin had moved fast, which meant someone had told him something had moved at all. I turned down the corridor towards Suite 3F, past framed district maps and 2 interns whispering over bankers' boxes, and when I reached the glass door, I could already see the seating arrangement through the reflection. Opposing counsel at the table centerline, our partners opposite, and 1 chair set against the side wall with no microphone in front of it. Daniel opened the door without looking up from his tablet. "We are on record in 6. Sit there for now." He indicated the side chair. I placed my briefcase beside it, but remained standing. I filed the motion. I logged the evidence intake. I will speak to Foundation if challenged. Harriet Bexley, lead partner for our side, lifted a hand for stillness. She was precise in the way seasoned litigators are precise, not unkind, but always aware of which voice would be billed and which voice would be blamed. "Claire, we need discipline in messaging. Opposing counsel is baiting chain of custody contamination. You are too proximate to this event. Daniel and I will carry argument. Too proximate." The phrase returned with fresh stationery and a higher hourly rate. Across the table, Martin's lead counsel, Evan Rourke, arranged his yellow pads in a perfect stack and gave me a professional nod that carried no acknowledgement of substance. Martin sat 1 seat to Rourke's right, silver watch catching the fluorescent panel every time he moved his wrist. He looked toward Harriet, not toward me. "We appreciate your team's cooperation," he said. "This can still be resolved quietly if we keep personalities out of it." Personalities. Another clean word for erasure. I took my seat on the side wall and opened my legal pad to the blue line under theories, not proof. The room's ventilation hummed above us, steady and indifferent, while Rourke started the meet and confer record in clipped formal diction. He argued that any data from a former vendor's personnel could include privileged communications, trade secrets, and manipulated excerpts, and he requested immediate sequestration with sanctions reserved. When Harriet began her response, she adopted the conciliatory tone firms use when they are trying to avoid being painted as reckless. Defendant is willing to discuss a neutral repository and privilege protocol. I wrote 1 line. Neutral repository already in place, C14. Rourke continued, "Your client has demonstrated a pattern of speculative accusations. Today's filing confirms that pattern." Martin leaned back and folded his hands behind his legal pad, then spoke as if he were clarifying a business memo. "Ms. Thompson has repeatedly confused suspicion with evidence. That confusion is now procedural risk for everyone." I lifted my eyes to him then, not for confrontation, only for identification. Evidence was submitted, sealed through litigation support with documented intake and restricted access. You were served the same notice as counsel. Daniel turned in his chair and gave me a warning look, usually reserved for unruly witnesses. "Claire," Harriet did not raise her voice, "please let us handle this." The side chair had no mic, but everyone heard me anyway. "I am handling foundation." Silence settled for one measured beat, then Rourke smiled toward Harriet as if sharing burden. "You see the difficulty." My phone buzzed again. New entry from Chambers. Emergency status conference moved up. Courtroom 5B, 2:10 p.m. I stood, placed the screen where Harriet could read it, and she scanned the message without expression. "We're done here," she said. "Arguments to the court." As we gathered our papers, I noticed the exclusion had deepened into choreography. Daniel handed binders to Harriet and Nolan Price, our appellate consultant, and passed over me, although the evidentiary appendix in his hand was my filing packet. I did not ask for it. I removed my own copy from my briefcase, clipped the C-14 receipt to the front, and walked out with the others into the corridor stream where no one acknowledged who had built the record they were about to argue. By the time we reached courtroom 5B, the gallery had filled with the particular audience emergency discovery hearings attract. Junior associates learning posture, in-house lawyers pretending to be incidental, and 2 legal reporters with notebooks open to fresh pages. The polished brass nameplates reflected the overhead lighting in hard bars. Ranked seating had been reassembled for the afternoon, and again my place was one step behind second chair. The judge entered, and the room rose and settled. Rourke stood first. "Your Honour, plaintiff moves for immediate protective order. Defendant has introduced data via undisclosed third-party contact outside formal discovery. We request evidentiary quarantine, return or destruction of any copied materials, and fees for emergency relief." The language was expected. The speed was the tell. Harriet rose. "Defendant denies misconduct. Material was not opened, copied, or disseminated. It was transferred sealed to court litigation support with chain of custody logs and restricted locker assignment pending judicial protocol. We request targeted forensic imaging as already moved and a neutral special master to supervise sequence." Rourke gave a thin smile. "A fishing request wrapped in procedural jargon." Martin asked to address the court through counsel and received a nod. "Your Honour, this is exactly what I stated this morning. Theories, not proof. Now coupled with irregular acquisition." I watched the court reporter's hands move without pause. The same line entered again, now under a different caption. The judge looked over her glasses toward our table. "Who has direct knowledge of intake handling?" Harriet answered first. "Our client can speak to transfer mechanics." Rourke interjected. "We object to unsworn narrative from a partisan source." The judge held up a hand. "Noted. I asked who has direct knowledge." For a moment, no one spoke. Daniel's pen clicked once, then stilled. I stood. "I do, Your Honour. And litigation support technician Ms. Alvarez can authenticate intake logs," Rourke began. "We would require live testimony and cross." "You will get what process allows," the judge said. "I'm not adjudicating merits this hour. I am preserving integrity." That single sentence altered the room's axis. Not because it favoured me, but because it removed performance from first position and replaced it with mechanism. She directed the deputy to call litigation support. While we waited, murmurs moved through the back row, quickly suppressed when the bailiff glanced over. 3 days earlier, I had been left off an internal strategy thread by my own co-counsel. That omission had felt ordinary enough to be deniable. In this room, under oath architecture and transcript capture, deniability had less space to breathe. Miss Alvarez appeared on video from the third-floor support suite, badge clipped straight, background wall lined with numbered media lockers. She was sworn in. Her testimony was brief and technical, exactly as credibility prefers. She confirmed receipt of one sealed evidence pouch labelled Key V17 and companion paper logs, intake time, barcode assignment, restricted access status, and no content access pending judicial authorization. She identified my signature, her own, and the auto-generated chain log. No adjectives, no speculation. Process as testimony. Rourke cross-examined with practiced calm. "Ms. Alvarez, can you verify the origin authenticity of contents not yet opened?" "No," she said. I can verify custody continuity from intake forward. Can you rule out tampering before intake? I can verify tamper strip integrity at intake and hash label presence. Pre-intake events require additional forensic review. He nodded as if he had won something. The judge made notes, then turned to the clerk. Is the court's e-discovery special master available this afternoon? The clerk checked a tablet. Dr. Leona Ward is in chambers on another matter, Your Honour. Bring her in. I knew the name. Dr. Ward had a reputation for methodical severity and no patience for storytelling from either side. She entered 12 minutes later in a dark suit with a slim case file under her arm, took the oath and listened to the court's summary without interruption. Her first glance at the filings was almost clinical, scanning custodian counts, date ranges and requested imaging scope. Rourke attempted to pre-frame. Doctor, the defence request is overbroad and speculative. Dr. Ward did not look at him. I have not offered an opinion yet. She read for another minute, then addressed the bench in clipped diction. The proposed custodian set is narrow. 3 custodians, constrained date bands tied to specific contract amendments, hash verification required, privilege screen protocol included. This is not a broadnet request on its face. The phrase landed in the room with more force than volume. Rourke adjusted his glasses. And the acquisition irregularity? Dr. Ward turned a page. Irregular acquisition is a legal characterization. From a forensic standpoint, sealed submission to court support with immediate restricted logging mitigates contamination risk. Proper sequence now is supervised imaging of source systems and comparative hash analysis. She paused, then added, the chronology described by Ms. Thompson is technically coherent with known deletion pattern disputes. My name attached to coherence, spoken by the one witness in the room no one could plausibly call partisan. That was the recognition cue, small on paper and seismic in context. Across the table, Martin's posture changed by degrees that would have been invisible to anyone not trained to read control loss. His shoulders stayed back, but his fingers tightened around the water glass, and the base made a faint click against polished wood. He said nothing. The judge leaned forward. Doctor, Ward, recommendation for immediate order? Quarantine existing sealed media in court custody. Grant limited forensic imaging of identified custodians and mail archives under my supervision. Prohibit deletion and auto-purge functions effective immediately. Require both parties to submit preservation affidavits by 9 a.m. tomorrow. Rourke stood quickly. Your Honour, that imposes severe burden on my client, absent any finding of misconduct. The judge's reply was even. Preservation is not punishment, it is obligation. Harriet spoke then, measured and exact. Defendant accepts that protocol. Rourke asked for a brief recess to confer. The judge granted 7 minutes. When the room broke, Daniel turned toward me at last, expression tight with the discomfort of someone forced to acknowledge an argument he had spent all day trying to contain. You should have told us Ward would frame it this way. I didn't know she would be called, I said. He looked as if he wanted to contest the point, then stopped. We still need unified messaging. Then stop downgrading your own foundation witness. He held my gaze, then gave one short nod that was not apology but no longer dismissal. On the opposite side, Martin and Rourke conferred in low tones. Martin spoke first, sharply, then lowered his voice when he noticed 2 reporters watching his hands. Audience management, always. Yet the audience had shifted from impression to protocol, and protocol left him less room. Court resumed. The judge entered a written interim order from the bench, sealed materials to remain in locker C14. Dr. Ward appointed to oversee targeted imaging and hash comparison. Auto-deletion suspended, preservation affidavits due by morning, emergency hearing on compliance set for 48 hours. She denied sanctions without prejudice and reserved all merits arguments. Then she looked directly at both tables. Counsel will refrain from rhetorical attacks and proceed by verifiable submissions. The gavel strike was light, almost gentle. The effect was not. As people stood and began the familiar shuffle of binders and whispered damage control, I remained seated long enough to note every directive verbatim. Outside the courtroom doors, gallery chatter rose and scattered down the corridor, carrying fragments of analysis that no longer centered whether I was emotional or speculative. Now they were talking about custodians, hash values, auto-purge suspension, and Ward. The vocabulary had changed. That mattered. I stepped into the hall with my legal pad against my chest, and the ventilation hiss moving above the lights like a fixed line on a monitor. Social pressure had not lifted. It had tightened into higher stakes and cleaner rules. But recognition had entered the record through the one channel Martin could not charm and my own peers could not sideline. A neutral authority under oath stating that my sequence held. That was enough for the day. Enough to keep process alive until proof could speak for itself. I had just reached the brass rail outside courtroom 5B when the deputy opened the door behind me and called both parties back in, her tone clipped with the authority of someone relaying instructions she did not need to explain. Counsel, remain available. Special Master requests immediate protocol conference on the record. Around me, the corridor traffic slowed without stopping, the way people slow at the edge of a visible rupture while pretending to keep their own momentum. Harriet pivoted first, Daniel half a step behind her, and on the opposite side, Rourke touched Martin's sleeve with 2 fingers, steering him back through the doorway before reporters could close the distance. Inside, the gallery had thinned but not emptied. A few associates stayed seated with open notebooks, and one legal reporter had already uncapped a second pen. The polished wood still held the imprint of the prior session, water rings and paper edges and the faint smell of warm electronics. Dr. Ward stood at the clerk's side with a slim laptop connected to the courtroom display, reading from a printed checklist as if reputations were irrelevant and only sequence mattered. The judge resumed the bench without preamble. Dr. Ward has requested immediate clarification on implementation logistics. We will take this up now. Her gaze moved from one table to the other and settled nowhere in particular, which in that room meant she was already done with performance. Ward spoke in the same clipped diction she had used an hour earlier. To execute the preservation order, my office initiated hold notice verification pings against identified systems. One result requires immediate judicial direction. She turned the monitor so the bench and both counsel tables could see a single line from a log extract, timestamp in military format, server path, automated action code. At 14:57, after issuance of this court's preservation directive, an auto-purge task attempted to run on the executive relay mailbox. Task failed due to hold lock. Attempt is recorded. Rourke stood so quickly his chair scraped. Your Honour, we object to characterization. Automated enterprise tasks are routine and not evidence of intent. Ward did not look at him. I described a recorded event and its result. Martin's jaw tightened once, a small muscular shift more telling than any argument. He leaned toward Rourke and said something I couldn't hear. Rourke nodded without turning back to him, then addressed the bench again with formal composure stretched thin at the edges. Plaintiff can provide an affidavit from IT operations. There is no basis to infer misconduct from a scheduled process. The judge folded her hands. Then you may provide that affidavit, tonight. Signed by a person with direct knowledge. She turned to Ward. What direction do you need now? Ward clicked to the next page. The court has sealed third-party media in support custody. To assess whether that media warrants expanded retrieval, I request authorization for controlled hash comparison at header level only in court with counsel present. No content review absent further order. This will answer authenticity overlap, not merits. The crux of the case had always been that Martin ruled rooms by framing credibility before facts could be tested. Ward's request cut directly through that paradigm. Header-level comparison was narrow, technical, and almost impossible to dramatize. It was exactly why it could work. Harriet rose. Defendant consents. Rourke hesitated for one beat, then said, Plaintiff objects to scope creep, but subject to strict reservation of privilege and admissibility challenges, will not obstruct a neutral comparison. Granted, the judge said. Do it now. The deputy retrieved the sealed bin from litigation support escort within minutes. Miss Alvarez entered with the same badge-straight posture, set the C-14 container on the evidence cart, and confirmed seal integrity on the record. Ward documented each step out loud. Seal number, barcode, witness presence, time of opening. No one interrupted. The courtroom display filled with directories and hash strings, sterile rows of alphanumeric truth that looked like nothing unless you knew what continuity required. Ward imported only the header metadata from KV17, then cross-checked against live snapshots from the 3 custodians named in my motion. She narrated as she worked, each sentence a procedural rail that kept anyone from slipping rhetoric into the gap. Hash match means identical data block at this level. Non-match means divergence or absence. We are not reading message bodies. By the time the first comparison finished, the room had gone very still. Not dramatic stillness, not cinematic silence, just the focused quiet of professionals recognizing that a claim had moved from argument into measurable structure. Ward read from the screen. Custodian 1 procurement, 39 header matches to archived items absent from prior production index. Click. Custodian 2, billing operations, 47 matches. Click. Custodian 3, executive relay, 28 matches. She paused only to total them. 114 matched email headers across 3 custodians, date banded within the disputed amendment period. No one spoke. The number sat in the air with more force than any raised voice could have carried. Martin was first to break the silence. Header matches do not establish wrongdoing, Ward answered without inflection. They establish existence and prior non-production of relevant communications at the header level. Wrongdoing is for the court. The judge looked down at the running log, then up at Martin. This morning, you asked the reporter to memorialize your statement that Ms. Thompson had theories, not proof. Her tone did not sharpen. It simply removed oxygen from every available deflection. The record now reflects 114 matched headers aligned to her timeline request. She shifted her gaze to both counsel tables. From this point forward, this court expects precision, not posture. That was the reversal, concise and public, and it happened in the same room where I had been arranged at the edge like optional furniture. No applause, no outburst, no grand declaration. A judge, a special master, a number, and the transcript line that changed weight when facts caught up to it. Rourke asked to be heard. Your Honour, we request opportunity to brief technical context before any adverse framing enters the docket. You'll have briefing time, the judge said. You will also have production deadlines. She began dictating from the bench, each clause landing with procedural finality. Full forensic imaging under Ward's supervision, rolling production of the 114 underlying emails with intact metadata, privilege log due in parallel, and a show cause schedule on preservation compliance. She added one more instruction that hit harder than the rest because it targeted the source of Martin's power. Any public or internal statement mischaracterizing today's comparison as speculative will be sanctionable if inconsistent with this transcript. I wrote every word as she spoke, blue ink cutting clean lines across paper already marked by his earlier insult. Across the aisle, Daniel had stopped clicking his pen. Harriet sat perfectly upright, expression neutral, but her hand rested for a moment on my exhibit binder before sliding it toward me rather than away. It was a small gesture, almost administrative, yet it acknowledged ownership in a language firms understand. By 5:40 p.m, the emergency session moved into a supplemental same-day status check-in under the interim order to avoid overnight gaps. The previously scheduled compliance hearing in 48 hours remained on calendar, unless later modified by court order. The gallery filled again, this time with more senior faces and fewer whispered side conversations. Ward testified briefly to method continuity and then gave the line that turned professional skepticism into institutional recognition. Ms. Thompson's chronology is materially accurate at the metadata level presently tested. She delivered it the way she delivered server paths, without flourish, which made it devastating. The prevailing hierarchy in that room had depended on treating my timeline as temperament. A neutral expert had now called it accurate under oath. The destabilization started in details too small for anyone outside litigation to notice. Martin reached for his water and missed the stem by a fraction, fingers striking glass hard enough to make it ring against mahogany. When he tried again, his hand was steady for 3 seconds, then not. Colour drained from his face slowly, beginning at the mouth. He passed a note to Rourke, who read it, folded it once, and did not respond. Rourke asked to approach. The judge denied approach and told him to state any request on the record. He asked for 10 minutes to confer off the record with his client. Granted. During recess, the courtroom did not empty this time. People stayed in place, watching the opposite table with the discreet fixation of professionals witnessing a control system fail in real time. Martin bent toward Rourke and spoke in a rapid, low stream. Rourke answered in short bursts, one hand flat on the table as if anchoring himself. At one point, Martin looked toward me, not with contempt now, not even with anger, but with the stunned arithmetic of a man recalculating audience perception and finding no favourable denominator. For years, he had relied on the room agreeing to his version before documents arrived. Now documents were arriving faster than he could frame them. Daniel leaned toward me without taking his eyes off the bench. "You were right to narrow custodians." I kept my voice level. "Narrow survives scrutiny." He nodded once. "I'll amend our draft position for sanctions exposure. Use Ward's phrasing exactly." "I will." When recess ended, Rourke stood with a sheen of sweat at his temples he had not had earlier. "Your Honour, plaintiff intends full cooperation with production schedule, without conceding intent or waiver." His diction remained formal, but the cadence had lost its practiced ease. Martin stayed seated, lips pressed thin, staring at the display where the total still sat in the corner, 114. The judge issued the next order in measured terms that left no room for evasive interpretation. Plaintiff will produce the 114 emails and associated metadata under special master supervision. Plaintiff will submit sworn declarations identifying any deletion directives, automated or manual, affecting the 3 custodians during the relevant period. Defendant may seek fee shifting and adverse inferences by notice motion after production review. She paused, then added the sentence that landed like a sealed door. The court is no longer evaluating whether there is proof. The court is evaluating what was done with it. Martin finally rose as if to speak, then sat back down when Rourke touched his forearm. That touch, brief and controlled, carried the panic counsel never names allowed. "Stop talking before you worsen the record." Martin swallowed, reached for the water again, and this time took a sip that looked like effort. He did not ask for the reporter to read anything back. After adjournment, the corridor outside 5B was crowded enough that people had to angle sideways to pass. 2 senior partners from firms that had ignored me for months now watched me with guarded calculation. Not warmth, just recognition of altered leverage. One of Keen Systems' in-house compliance managers stood near the elevator bank clutching a folder to her chest, eyes fixed on the floor until Martin passed, then lifting only after he was gone. No one joked. No one offered me sympathy. The room had moved beyond that stage. At the far end of the hall, I saw Eleanor Voss seated on a bench beneath the donor plaques, hands folded over her portfolio, posture unchanged. She did not wave. She did not need acknowledgement. I crossed to her and placed a copy of the minute order beside her without speaking. She scanned the first page, then looked up. "Entered?" she asked. "Entered." She gave one short nod. "Then continuity holds." "It does." She stood and adjusted the strap on her bag. "They may still fight every inch." "I expect them to." Her expression softened by a degree that never became sentiment. "Good. Expectation keeps records clean." Then she walked toward the stairwell, choosing steps over elevators, and disappeared from view before the crowd shifted again. I remained by the bench long enough to hear the courthouse ventilation settle into its evening rhythm, steadier now that the day's hearings were ending. Behind the glass partitions, clerks were already processing the next stack of orders, indifferent to names, faithful to sequence. At counsel table hours earlier, Martin had tried to fix me in the transcript as a woman with theories. By nightfall, the transcript held 114 reasons that Frame could not survive. He had built his authority on audience management, and in a single afternoon, the audience had watched the mechanism fail. First the log, then the matches, then the silence he could not control. I stayed by the bench until the corridor thinned to clerks, custodians, and the last attorneys rehearsing their narratives into silent phones. At 4:28, I went to the intake window and claimed the certified transcript I had requested before noon, the deputy clerk sliding the bound packet through the slot with a receipt stamp that bled faintly at one corner. "Complete through today's emergency sessions," she said. "Audio backup remains by motion only." I nodded, signed, and placed the transcript on top of my legal pad, directly above the blue-lined page where theories, not proof, were still underlined in ink that had not faded. That line had entered the record once as theatre. Now it sat bracketed by timestamps, orders, and a court-appointed expert's findings. As I turned, the process server who had watched the morning exchange gave me a brief professional nod, then returned to his own envelope stack. He had no part in this case, only a memory that would travel. Near the elevator bank, the in-house compliance manager I had noticed earlier stood with that folder still clutched against her chest. This time she stepped toward me. "Miss Thompson," she said, voice low but steady. "I'm Raina Patel, Keen Systems Compliance. I need to give your counsel something before the affidavits lock." She held out the folder. Inside was a printed escalation memo with tracked comments dated 11 months earlier and an email cover page routing it to Martin's office with the subject "Hold for exec review." The comment in the margin was short: "Delay classification update until after renewal close." "I wrote the memo," she said. I never got a response. Then my access changed. "I should have come forward sooner." "Will you sign a declaration?" "Yes." "Then do it through your own counsel and serve both sides tonight. Keep originals. Scan with metadata." She swallowed and nodded. "Understood." She hesitated, then added, "Some of us saw the gaps. We did not say it out loud." "You're saying it now." She left for the stairwell and I logged the contact document description and instruction given in my notes before I forgot a single verb. At 5:06, I forwarded the note to Harriet and Daniel with one line. "New third-party compliance memo. Potential corroboration of delayed classification directive. Declaration pending." Daniel responded in 40 seconds. "Received. Good capture." Harriet's response came 2 minutes later. "Bring hard copy to War Room now." The War Room was a borrowed conference suite on 7. Glass walls turned opaque by evening privacy film. Air cooled too aggressively for comfort. By 6:15, binders lined the table in precise stacks. Interim orders, preservation affidavits, ward protocol, KV-17 chain, discrepancy log. Miss Alvarez had transmitted the full custody ledger, including seal break time, header comparison scope, and reseal confirmation after court adjournment. Every physical item now had a status line. KV-17 moved from sealed intake to court-authorized header review and back to restricted custody pending full supervised imaging. The companion discrepancy logs were marked as potential hearing exhibits and copied with receipt history attached. My morning motion and the certified transcript were indexed for sanctions briefing. Nothing floated unlogged. At 7:02, Eleanor Voss joined by secure line, voice unchanged from the mezzanine corridor. Harriet asked foundation questions only, and Eleanor answered in the narrow factual lane we had agreed. Role, date of export, chain labels, instruction history, no content speculation. When Harriet asked whether anyone at her former firm had instructed deletion, Eleanor paused one measured beat and said, "I was instructed to prioritize storage optimization and to narrow retained mailbox windows after litigation was reasonably foreseeable." Harriet asked for names. Eleanor provided them. We ended the call with declaration language drafted and service protocol set for 9:30 p.m. As the speaker clicked off, Daniel looked at me across the table and said, "Your contemporaneous note from mezzanine is carrying half this foundation." It was the first fully direct sentence of professional recognition he had given me all day. By 8:52 the next morning, courtroom 5B was full again, but the gaze dynamics had changed. The same junior associates who had avoided my eyes now watched every screen update as if their own futures were tied to hash values. None of them approached me, and none of them ever later claimed they had known all along. Their silence remained what it had been: self-protection. The fluorescent panel over the witness stand, the one that had flickered on day one, held steady without a single stutter. Dr. Ward testified first, this time after supervised content production of the 114 emails overnight through mirrored forensic pulls from the 3 custodians. Her summary was precise. Authentic messages, intact metadata, non-production in prior responses, and deletion directives traceable through authenticated server logs to executive credentials assigned to Martin Keen. Rourke tried to defuse the credential point by suggesting delegated access. Ward answered, "Delegation can explain action. It does not erase traceability. The directive pathway originates at those credentials unless disproven." Then, in the same clipped tone she had used throughout, she stated, "Ms. Thompson's chronology is materially accurate. Reena Patel testified next under subpoena, palms flat on the rail, reading from her own signed escalation memo and confirming she sent it to Executive Relay before her access was curtailed. She did not dramatise and she did not retreat. The court reporter's machine moved in a constant mechanical rhythm as the room absorbed what could no longer be waved off as interpretation. When Martin finally spoke, he attempted one last reframing. There was no intent to conceal. This was systems noise during a complex renewal cycle. The judge looked down at the production log, then at him and delivered the line that ended his control of the room. You told this court she had no proof. The record shows she had precision. No one shifted in their seats after that. The judge cited spoliation findings, entered adverse inference instructions for the contract claims, awarded fee recovery on the emergency discovery motions, and referred preservation misconduct questions for disciplinary review. She set a same-day settlement conference with a magistrate judge at 3 p.m., warning both parties that further posture would be expensive in ways billable rates could not hide. The settlement conference took place in a smaller suite with no gallery, only counsel, parties, a magistrate, and a clock loud enough to make every pause audible. Martin sat straighter than usual and spoke less than I'd ever seen him speak. The first offer was framed as commercial closure without admission. Harriet slid the sheet to me and I marked 3 edits in blue. Full restoration of withheld fees with interest, written correction of termination rationale circulated to the same executive distribution that received the original notice, and a neutral reference plus statement of completed compliance architecture authorship under my name. Daniel added a 4th, fee petition coverage for motion practice already incurred. We sent it back. At 4:41, after 2 caucus rounds and 1 failed attempt by Martin to carve out language that would bar me from preserving the timeline in public filings, the magistrate brought everyone together and said, "This resolution either reflects the record or it does not happen today." Martin looked to Rourke, then to the tabletop, then signed. I signed after Harriet initialed the final red lines and the magistrate confirmed on the record that nothing in the agreement restricted truthful docket submissions tied to adjudicated discovery events. Judgment leverage secured, fees restored, standing restored in writing, and no gag on factual chronology. I left the settlement suite at 5:18 with the executed terms sheet in a sealed envelope and walked straight to the filing terminal on 3. The hallway smelled of paper dust and cold air. I drafted the final statement for docket entry as a concise evidentiary timeline. Initial hearing, quote, preservation motion, chain of custody intake, special master protocol, header match count, production confirmation and resulting orders. No adjectives, no retaliation language, just sequence and source references. I attached the transcript sites and submitted before cutoff. Accepted at 5:37 p.m. When I stepped back from the terminal, the building had entered evening quiet. The ventilation still hissed above the lights, but now it sounded less like static and more like continuity. The same mechanical breath that had watched me be diminished and then watched the record correct itself. I opened my legal pad to the first page, looked at the blue line beneath theories not proof, and drew one final mark through the phrase, not as erasure, but as closure. Silence wasn't peace. It was the price I paid to survive him, and truth, once entered, no longer needs permission.